Here's to whiskey kisses, the peaty taste of sin. Adam Bond.
Greetings, whiskey folk, and welcome back to Drinking Out Loud. I am your host, Adam Bradshaw, and it is an absolute pleasure to have you here in the Strat Studio on the Dram Association YouTube channel. And today, we're up to the second part in our fantastic charity series in collaboration with the Victoria Whisky Festival 2021. And we have an extremely special guest, someone who I've had a lot of fun with every time he visits Victoria. Ladies and gentlemen, Ray Daniel.
Hello. How you doing, man?
I'm doing grand, man. Yourself?
Good. Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, you too. We're actually, just as we were setting up, Ray was just mentioning how Victoria is one of his favorite places to visit, and it feels like it's weird this year because he's normally here this time of year, of course.
Yeah.
It's
definitely feels like something's been stolen. I am there in spirit. I'm always a Victorian spirit, though, in fairness.
Beauty. Well, you know, it's there's never a better time to move to Victoria than now, especially the increase of pricing in houses. Don't wait. If you're going to move to Victoria, do it now.
If the plan is to do it now. Noted.
So, Ray, you're joining us from out east. You're in Ontario right now, right?
Yeah, I'm in Toronto, locked away into my little corner of joy. We're in a little bit of a snowstorm right now, so makes it a little bit easier to stay inside.
Nice. But, and looking at your corner of joy, that's quite joyous.
Yeah, it's, as I always say, it's amazing what you can do with a bit of food coloring. Yeah, it's all purely educational based, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And even a couple of guitars in the corner there. If we get 3 or 4 drams in and you want to give us a rendition or something.
It's been known to happen once or twice.
So this is a really interesting thing for Drinking Out Loud, because as far as I can tell, I mean, my memory's not the best in general. As far as I can tell, we've been doing this for almost a year now, and I don't think we've actually had any American whiskeys, which is kind of weird. But there's a really big reason for that, and that's because I don't actually know that much about American whiskey. Okay. Growing up in the UK, is by the sound of it, you grew up quite close to where I did. So
not too far away. Yeah.
You can probably attest we don't have that much of an American whiskey culture. No. There's 2 big names in American whiskey. They both start with J. And it's a funny thing. I don't know. I don't know why J whiskeys are always so popular. You know, we've got Jim, we've got Jack, we've got Johnny, and we've got Jameson. Yeah. I don't know what's going on there.
Hey, you've got Jose when it comes to tequila.
Oh, perfect, yeah. I think that's a pro tip for anyone getting into the whiskey business. Make sure your distillery starts with J.
Make sure your name begins with J. You're good to go.
Yeah, or I mean, apart from Jameson, of course, which is not named after a person but a place, as far as I'm aware. I mean,
Jameson was his stern name.
Ah, of course it was. Yes.
Jameson. Yes.
No, you're right. Of course. So I guess it's just making sure you've got a J name to start with.
Just put it
I'm
in
already
there somewhere.
Yeah.
My middle name begins with J, so I mean,
there you go.
It's going to be a good life.
And it's the funniest thing, because like in Scottish whiskey background, and for the most part in Irish as well, it's very rare to have whiskey named after a person. It's usually after a place, especially in Scotland. Whereas in North America, the whiskey seems to have a much more personal story, and I think that's very much the case with Jim Beam.
Very, very much the case. I mean, like, you know, when you look through kind of the evolution of American whiskey, you know, it all kind of really started off very, very centralized locations, right? So you've got, you know, Pennsylvania and Maryland, where like rye, that was really the home base of American whiskey. And then as, you know, the outward expansion started to happen within the states, and they started to kind of move westward, and places like Kentucky became a thing. You know, you had all these people who were producing whiskey in these very small little areas, right? So, you know, when it came to, you know, like we have in Ireland or Scotland, you know, you're talking about something from a place, but that place is a good bit away. Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, it didn't really have the need, but, you know, these were very much name basis. Plus also, you know, I mean, you're looking at hundreds of years between the foundation of commercial whiskey distilleries, say in Ireland, and then in the States and Canada. So you have more of like, they're coming into it with more of a, say, a commercial mind, and, you know, you want to tie your name to it, as opposed to this is where it's from. This is kind of the thing, right?
And that they all sort of started with much more size underneath them than I think most of the sort of traditional Scottish ones did as well. I mean, you think of the way that the distilleries look in Scotland. You think of something like Strathisla, which I've got a picture of me behind here. It's just a tiny little weird cottage with a pagoda roof and a couple of stills in it. Like most bourbon distilleries. I mean, obviously nowadays they're quite big because the industry is massive, but I think they all started off relatively sizable, didn't they?
I mean, comparatively, if you were looking at, say, something in Ireland starting off in the late 1700s or, 1500s or 1600s, and something starting off in the States in the 1800s or 1900s, then sure, yeah, there's just naturally going to be a different size or a bigger kind of start off to it. But he also had a lot of these families, like, the distillery they started in, the very, very start, isn't where they are now. And they've gone through a few since then. Within the Beam family, there's been a few that they've gone through. The Samuels family, same thing over at Maker's Mark. There is a couple of kind of old ruins of distilleries from the old day. And, and a lot of them as well were rebuilt, right? Where the Beam plant is, the old Murphy Good distillery, Maker's Mark, they have the old Burke Springs distillery that, just were mothballed and shuttered down and then repurchased, refurbished and good to go. So, yeah, there's the two kind of styles of whiskey, or whether it's whichever side of the Atlantic you're on, they started off in very different places for sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's definitely a big sense of family, especially in Jim Beam, and especially with the naming conventions as well. And that's kind of what we're talking about today is Basil Hayden and friends. Yes. Would you like to explain? We're gonna start off with the. I don't know what the official name of this. I've always referred to it as the original Basil Hayden's. I don't know what it's actually technically called, but
yeah. So I mean, that's kind of whenever we're referring to them, Basil Hayden. That's the one that we just refer to. It is our, I guess, Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey small batch, I guess, would be the, if you wanted to really get a mouthful of name in there.
It's the kind of name when your mum's really angry at you and she says the whole name. That's if anyone ever calls it that, you're in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, we refer to it as Basil 99.9% of the time, right?
Nice. And I refer to it as Basil. Sorry.
Well, but you know what? Here's the thing about it, right? When you look at the origins of that family, it would actually be Basil because they were of English origin, so. It would be Basil. That would be, I guess, the original pronunciation. But of course, through time, things change.
Yep.
My name is Mark. It ended up being Ray. I have no idea how that happened.
That's remarkable. Wow.
Oh my God, no. Well, I got to give you that one. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Very fast. This was the start really of the world of Basil Hayden bourbons as far as the Beam family goes. But the origins of Basil Hayden as a brand, or I guess as the liquid that we drink, goes back considerably further. So Basil Hayden was actually a real guy. Grew up Maryland, Pennsylvania kind of area. So when you kind of think back to then, the whiskeys that were being made, it was kind of the home of the Monongahela style rye whiskey. Right? Rye whiskey was very, very much the thing. At that point, corn wasn't being used to make whiskey, right? It wasn't until that outward expansion when you had those corn writs that they basically encouraged people to move by giving them land, but they put provisions on that land. Like, you had to claim it in the Kentucky area of West Virginia, which would eventually become the state of Kentucky. And you were growing corn on it, right? And when you take the great water sources that you have in Kentucky, it made just for great environment to grow corn, right? So now all of a sudden you had farmers being in the exact same position they would have been in Ireland and Scotland with, barley and wheat, as they would have been in, Pennsylvania, Maryland with rye. Only now they had corn, they had excess corn, and they started to distill it because they knew how to distill. All these people moved there, right? Farmers have been distilling for hundreds and hundreds of years. So now all of a sudden they were distilling corn, and it was notably different flavor-wise compared to rye. I mean, again, we're looking at early style whiskey here. So it's not, something that's being made and then left to sit and mellow for 8 years. This is coming off the still into a glass and boom, off you go, right? So if you take corn distillate and rye distillate, they're very, very, very different flavor-wise, right? So what people would do is, because they knew rye had that sharpness and it had that kind of backbone flavor to it, they would add rye in. When Basil started making his whiskey, he just used more rye. he really liked that flavor. And, when you consider that he grew up in that Maryland, Pennsylvania area where rye was very prevalent, it made sense he would put a lot of rye in there, right?
Yeah.
And to kind of give you an idea of how much rye, when we look at a standard rye whiskey, we're looking anywhere up to about 15%, or standard bourbon, up to about 15% rye, in or around that. With Basil, we're looking at about 27%.
Oh, wow.
Right?
That's more rye than most Canadian ryes.
Exactly, yeah. So you're looking at considerably more. So he kind of became very well known for that. And, the family's farming enterprise was really, bolstered by the fact that they were making some really, really cool and very unique whiskey at the time. And by the time his grandson came along, he was the one who really decided to make a commercial push on it, right? Like actually open a commercial distillery as opposed to just distilling excess grains. Now it was going to be farming with a purpose of eventually making that grain into whiskey, right? So he opened up in Nelson County, which, Nelson County was a very important part of Kentucky. It was, they were just putting in a train depot in there, which meant easy access for grains coming in and for product going out. It was a very, very, ideal place to be when you were expanding a business. And the beans to the plant there, the Samuels family had a plant there. He opens it up. He wants to use his grandfather's recipe. He wants to kind of have that ode to his grandfather. So he calls it Old Grandad, right? When you look at the bottle of Old Grandad, you actually see the picture of Basil Hayden on the front there.
Which is actually going to be whiskey number 2 today after we've tried the Basil Hayden. Because, I always knew there was a bit of a link there.
Yeah, so Basil Hayden essentially is Old Grandad. And then over the course of time, obviously, through the kind of the rougher years of bourbon, say from like the late 1890s and then through to the end of Prohibition, you had a lot of these brands that were changing hand, right? Eventually, the Old Grandad will become part of National Distillers' portfolio. And within that, you also had Old Crow and Old Overholt, which was then purchased by Beam, right? So that's kind of how Beam got their hands on it. This was around like 1985-ish. So when you think about the timing, this is when Booker is starting to work on the small batch collection, right? He's starting to really evolve this whole philosophy of small batch maturation. So, he has this new liquid coming through. He has this new recipe they can work with, a new yeast strain they can work with. So he says, hey, why the hell not? Let's just give it a shot and see how this works out.
Nice.
Certainly tinkered a few different things around with it, but at the end of it, he decided to, instead of, okay, we took this in, we're going to make it our own and put a completely new spin on it. That wasn't really Booker's style. He wanted to make sure that he gave acknowledgement to where it, deserved to be. So he decided to call it Basil Hayden. And then since then, it kind of, took off and off. Yeah. One of the great things, I don't know if you have one poured there in front of you or not yet.
I shall do so now. I've been waiting for the go.
Waiting for the go. Hey, listen, you don't need me to tell you to drink, man.
I've been waiting for it to get to socially drinking time. Out here in BC, it's currently 10:20, so it'll do.
This is the great thing about time zones. You can just say you're working off my time zone.
Oh, perfect.
It's past lunch out here, so we're good to go.
So this is the question of how on earth do you open it? Is there a pull tab somewhere, or do I just pull the whole thing off?
There's not, but my usual way is to just literally pull the entire thing off. It should just slide off like a sleeve if you kind of give it a grab and a twist.
This is, it's a good gift when they've wrapped it well, right? There you go.
And it's a truly wonderful whiskey, though. I mean, there's a couple of kind of cool little, Easter eggy kind of things with it. You find that through. Oh yeah, the corks are. These new corks, we're making sure there's no liquid getting out of there.
Jesus, yeah, you're not messing around with this one. Hang on. I'm going to go off camera and get a pair of pliers.
Sorry, you can all just hang with me.
There we go. Oh, I've got it.
There you go.
Nice. That is a very satisfying pop, though, I've got to say.
It's a very satisfying pop.
And it's especially satisfying because like I said, I've not got a huge experience with bourbons, but for the most part, they've got screw tops, and that's just not satisfying. Yeah,
but we're starting to see a bit of a... Bourbon's going through a lot of movement right now, right? I think it's, aside from anything else, it's becoming a more of a category of whiskey that, people are aware of on a global scale. I mean, you said it great there. I mean, you grew up in England. or the UK. I grew up in Ireland, right, just across the sea from you.
Okay, you're allowed to tell people I grew up in England. It's not a dark secret. I mean, for those who don't know where Yorkshire is, I sometimes tell them it's the lowlands of Scotland. But
well, that's I've heard that one come through before, so I figured I'd just say the UK for our global listeners. But in Ireland, it was the same thing. I mean, I worked my entire life in bars, and I was constantly going, with bosses and stuff to buy liquor for the stores or for the bar. And I mean, if you wanted American whiskey, you were right. You had the 2 J's. That was your options.
The only other one I remember seeing behind bars in Edinburgh was Maker's Mark.
Maker's Mark if you were in a fancy bar in Ireland.
Yeah.
If you were in a fancy bar, you got Maker's Mark.
Yeah, if you were in the Waverley, I think you could get Maker's Mark.
Yeah, so that was kind of it, right? But now, we're starting to see it. And just at Christmas time there, I wanted to purchase a bottle of bourbon for my uncle back in Ireland. So, went on to Celtic Whiskey Shop's website and had looked through, and I was actually kind of blown away by the fact that there was, a page dedicated to American whiskey. Which was,
I was noticing that on Matter of Malt as well.
Yeah, it's fun, right? Like, it's good to see it starting to really, expand, and we're seeing huge expansions in France, Germany. Australia is one of the best markets that we've got. Russia, we're having huge success with it, and even now the Asian market is starting to catch on to it.
And so Australia, I lived there for a little while, and they're big fans of the Jim Beam and Coke in the little cans premix. That's huge over there.
Yeah, well, really, Australia created the ready to drink category, right? Like,
yeah,
and it makes sense. Who wants to carry a bunch of bottles and glasses and all that sort of stuff, mixed bottles to the beach when you can just grab a couple of cans, toss them in your cooler, and off you go? Absolutely,
yeah. And I just poured the bonded as well, because I have a feeling we're probably going to end up doing a side by side of these two.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about the Australian whiskey market as well, I think I mentioned on a previous episode, but their laws for whiskey are bizarre.
A couple of weird ones in there.
Yeah.
What are the big ones? Don't they have a lower alcohol proofing law?
Yeah, 37.
It's 37, isn't it? I wasn't sure if it was 35.
And I think Jim keeps it. I think Jim keeps it the 40, but one of their sister products in the Beam portfolio, Canadian Club, of course, is really, really popular over there.
Yes,
and that is 37 in I think. So yeah, I mean,
something new every day.
And it's the weirdest thing. So, and I think it's also you're allowed to call it whiskey at only 2 years old as well in Australia.
Right.
I don't know. I assume Canadian Club probably matures for the normal amount of time.
Yeah.
But at the very least, like, from what I understand, it is technically not whiskey when it is bottled and shipped when it leaves Canada, and somewhere magically in the Pacific, it suddenly becomes whiskey. I don't.
And bourbon's kind of interesting like that as well, because when you look at the laws around bourbon, like, it's a very, very tightly regulated form of whiskey, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the laws around maturation on it are kind of strange in that all it says is that it has to pass through a freshly charred white oak container. We call it bourbon. It doesn't give you an actual time.
As PBR have put to the test, I think.
Yeah, right. So, the reality is, you could technically take it off the still into a charred out bucket and then pour that into your glass and call it a bourbon. Right? If you're looking at straight bourbon, then you got your 2-year minimum and up. But then we pretty much don't pull anything before 4 years.
Nice.
But with Basil Hayden, we'll give you an idea of this one. This is going to be matured anywhere generally from about 5 to 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it is part of what we call our small batch collection. So this is it's actually a term that was coined by our 6th generation Beam family master distiller with Booker No of Booker's bourbon fame.
So he coined the term small batch.
Yeah, so if you actually look through,
which is prevalent everywhere now.
Yeah, Knob Creek's the first bottle of whiskey you'll find small batch ever appearing on.
Oh wow, that's cool.
And when you think that was only 1992, right? When Knob Creek, Basil, and Booker's came out, they all came out at the same time. So, and from then, it's become really a marketer's best friend, right? Throw small batch on there, and it makes it sound very, very, very exclusive and unique. And there's not a whole lot of it, right?
And you can tell. You can tell it's just a well-known phrase now, because even when it's not written on the bottle, people will refer to something as small batch without even being pointed by the marketers to do so. I did so exactly in the last video that aired, where I was doing some I was doing some Canmore strictly limited independent bottlings with Frank Hudson. And we remarked how, they're not single cask, but they're about, 4 or maybe 5 casks blended together. So we just called them small batch, not thinking twice about it.
Absolutely.
I feel like I owe some copyright money to Beam now.
Sorry, you can have it. But you know what? Like, everybody kind of has their own different interpretation of what small batch means. Some people will look at it as being, one fermenter. And we're doing it, we'll go fermenter by fermenter, and that's going to be our batch, and that's going to be about 25 or so barrels. So that's our idea of small batch. For Booker, it was literally just isolating very specific parts of a warehouse that have very specific maturation tendencies. So if you have very specific parts, it means you can only pull a certain amount of barrels from that area. So they were his small batch of barrels. So that's really kind of where, for Booker, it was a philosophy he had around aging and maturation that he needed to find a way to vocalize and to verbalize to people. So small batch was just his way of doing it. So to kind of give you an idea, we're using anywhere between maybe 350 barrels per batch of anything in our small batch range. Bookers and Bakers tend to be a little lower than that. And to kind of give you an idea of why that's small batch, because that sounds like a lot of barrels. Jim Beam White, for example, will be about 12 to 1,500 barrels per batch, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's kind of, this is the craft argument, right? When do you reach that size where you're no longer craft? Small batch works the same way. Small batch really, you could kind of determine off what's your total output. Right? If you're making 1 billion liters a year, then 1 million will be small batch, right? Yeah. So it's kind of, it's a difficult one, but flavor wise.
Yeah. Do you find with the small batch whiskies? I mean, I'm sure a company as well experienced as Beam know what they're doing, but is it more difficult to try and get consistency, I guess, with the small batches?
Not if we're doing it right. Like, this is kind of one of the conversation. I actually had this conversation a couple of weeks ago with a guy. We were talking about craft. And, we refer to pretty much all of our products as craft products, right? Yeah. Because as we've grown, we haven't changed the attention to detail.
No. And there's still a huge amount of skill involved in every step.
100%, right? Yeah. And that was kind of my argument was like, when do you stop being craft? How good does your product have to be, and how successful does that good product have to be or have to get for you to stop being considered craft and start being considered, mainstream, right? And it's kind of a difficult thing when you kind of look at it. And I mean, as I said, like the same detail and the same, attention to every single step in the process is taken as it was taken back then, if not more.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest argument for something's craft or not is how automated it is. And I mean, I've never visited Beam's place, but from what I understand, I think the most automated part of the system is that you've got a temperature setting which you can dial, and that's about it. Yeah. I mean, look,
like distilleries in general now, right? Like they've become pretty high tech affairs.
Absolutely.
Right? When you take some of the smaller distilleries and newer distilleries that start out, the capital is just not there right off the bat to go in with everything that you want. So you'll notice over time they build and build and build and build, right? And, that's awesome because it will help them keep consistency as they go on. So, we have rooms in Beam that look like mission control for NASA, right? Like, they genuinely do. But these are all just making sure that they're all really, if nothing else, they're tracking the progress of the whiskey.
But at the end of the day, they're not making any creative decision. The machines are just a tool.
Exactly. They're monitoring tools apart from anything else. And then, there's the stuff that you can't help but automate, right? Like you physically can't hand distill something. You need a still to do it. Yeah. Our bottling lines, well, that's just, sure, you can go to do hand bottling, but all of a sudden your $26 bottle is going to become $300.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And it's like even a lot of craft distillers nowadays are using a lot of that kind of technology. Like Shelter Point have a state of the art setup for their still. Like,
but it's what you want, right? And it's just going to make your whiskey better and better and more consistent, which is really what you're looking for. Consistency is the most important thing for us because the last thing you want is to pick up a bottle and go, "Wow, that was amazing." Go and spend $50 of your hard-earned money to buy another bottle, and it sucks.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't want that, right?
Yeah, it's key across the whole whiskey industry, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of the small new distilleries just can't compete with. I mean, they make some fantastic whiskeys, but the consistency just isn't there.
Yeah, but a lot of them do. They do it smart. They'll work off single barrel programs where the expectation is good there that it's going to be different.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And they can kind of show the versatility, I guess, of their distillate and their casks, but it also allows them for opportunities to try and taste and go, wow, you know what? That one cask here, that's incredible. Like, that's what we should really be working our way towards, and then try and mold everything after. Right? That was amazing. What did we do?
Yeah.
Right?
Whereas I'm guessing with the small batch program, I mean, Jim Beam are probably always experimenting with new flavor combinations and what the next release is going to be. Yeah. But the key thing is with Beam's program is they're always able to then replicate that. It's if you get one fantastic product, well, they can make more.
And this is really the art of whiskey makers, right? Like, it's all formulaic, right? Like, it's all getting that formula together and making sure that you can follow that formula at all times. It's when it comes to the blending process, that's where the artistry really comes through, right? And that's where, but again, we have some of the best palates, some of the most highly trained whiskey makers, and people who don't just go, okay, I'm a master distiller, so they're constantly working on themselves and constantly trying new things. And, is there something that I can do that's better? And the one great thing that we have in the bourbon industry is that it's actually a pretty tight knit group. Like when you look at the whiskey makers from company to company to company, and a lot of them are tied back to the Beam family in some way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah.
Like I think Heaven Hill only got their first master distiller that wasn't a Beam family member, probably about 10, 12 years ago, right? The first master distiller at Maker's Mark was Emil Beam, right? So you've got like all these, there's a lot of outreach through it, but they work together. And, if someone's doing something cool, they share it, right? Ideas are shared.
Yeah. And there seems to be a certain beautiful lack of ego in the industry down in America. You'll go to, I mean, I've never been to any festivals in the States, unfortunately, or any of the, I'd love to go down to some of the big bourbon festivals. But from what I understand, you could be stood next to a guy in, denim dungarees or something, and it turns out he's actually the master distiller. He's just sort of wandering around, he's not dressed up in a tux. It's
I think there's a really good attitude within the bourbon community, the bourbon production community, about what the point is, about why they're doing it, right? Like,
yeah,
I can tell you right now, if you talk to somebody like Fred No, right, who's our current master distiller at Beam, right? He is the seventh generation in his family to hold that position at his distillery. His son is a distiller and will be the next master distiller. This is their heritage. This is their legacy, right? This is literally their family's history. Nothing makes them happier than the idea of 6 or 7 people sitting around a table and drinking on their products. And that's all they want. They want it to be a happy occasion. They want it to be a community occasion, right? And that's why we'll give so many different ideas on how to experience our whiskey slightly differently, even just from the same whiskey, because you can have 10 people drinking it the way they want to drink it, but it's the same bottle, And it's about community. It's not about exclusion. We don't really like to use the word exclusive on any releases that will come out, because it's not supposed to be exclusive. It's supposed to be inclusive. Yeah. And that's the mentality that you find within the bourbon industry, is that, and that's also, a lot of the reason why we'll do everything we possibly can to keep our quality as high as humanly possible and our prices as low as humanly possible.
And that's one of the big things that has always intrigued me about bourbon, is that you can get an absolutely incredible product for such small prices. I mean, even more so in the States. I mean, I don't know what the price of something like this Basil is down in some of the cheaper states, but blimey, I mean,
it's not expensive.
No, I think I think I picked up a bottle in Vegas when I was there a couple of years ago, and it was like $30 or something.
Yeah,
yeah,
like that. That sounds about right. Some states you'll find large scale versions of bottles for $15-$20. you find, a bottle of Jim Beam for $7-8 in some states, right?
Not one of those little airplane ones.
No, I'm talking, full $7.50.
Blimey. Yeah, I mean, that is inclusive.
Absolutely, but that's the whole point, right? Like, for sure there will be very, very, very limited releases that come out that don't follow the general formula, that are just genuinely more expensive to make.
Yeah.
But even with those, I mean,
and they're going to be aimed at not sort of your standard whiskey drinkers. They're going to be aimed at the hobbyists, and I think that's a big thing to realize, is that for a lot of people that will be watching these kind of videos, whiskey is a passion of ours. It's a hobby.
Absolutely.
But for the vast majority of the population, whiskey is just another delicious thing that you can enjoy. It's chocolate to us,
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, I think a really good example would be, something like Little Book. I think is a great example, right? Because right now it's probably the most expensive thing that we have consistently in market, and as far as anywhere in the world goes, really. Little Book is an incredibly expensive product to make, right? We make very, very, very little of it, but for us, it's not necessarily being targeted at like the hobbyists and the collectors and stuff like that. It's the special occasion. It's the wedding bottle. Yeah. It's the birth of your first child. It's, the engagement. It's, the promotion. It's those sort of things, right?
Yeah.
It's just that extra little bit of a step. We don't expect people to be, buying this stuff on a daily basis, right? That's why that's why we're not ensuring that we make thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of bottles every 3 or 4 months of it, right? Because
if you did, it'd be less special.
Exactly, and that's it. It's about just taking different moments and just being able to accentuate them with something just a little more special, a little more kind of rare, without having to go and spend $2,000 to do it.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, it's no secret to friends of mine that these two whiskeys are probably my two favorite bourbons. Aside from some of the more experimental ones, like I really like the Opidan bourbons coming out of Wheeling, Illinois. But that's mostly looked from a Scotch perspective, because they're very different and doing interesting things with Solera vats and all sorts of things, which is something that Beam's now doing. We'll get into that with our third whiskey. But for regular sort of bourbon flavored bourbons, these two, that's one of my problems with bourbon, is that anytime someone excitedly comes to me and says, oh, I've got this special bottle of this ridiculous 15-year-old bourbon that only 6 bottles came into BC and it's $3,000 to buy a bottle. It's like, cool. It probably is disgusting. I don't like, I've yet to find a bourbon over 12 years of age that I have found even remotely enjoyable.
Well, there's a lot of sense behind that, though, right? You can work those thoughts backwards and make sense of them.
Absolutely.
I mean, number one, Basil, we do find, is that whiskey that is most universally kind of acceptable, I guess you would say, or approachable, right? And it's
the blueprint of bourbon for me, this stuff.
Yeah, and it's made with that in mind, right? It's made with, we want this to be people's first real foray into the world of premium bourbons and super premium bourbons.
Yeah.
But we also have to keep in mind that the majority of the world, when they're drinking that special occasion whiskey, it's Scotch or Irish whiskey.
Yeah.
Right. And Japanese is gradually starting to kind of, crawl in there. When people are drinking mixed drinks, a lot of it is geographical. But, in the States, especially in the, to the early 90s and late 80s, when this was kind of being created, it was Canadian whiskey that ruled the roost as far as mixed drinks went, right? Mm-hmm. Then when you look at a lot of those, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, of course. But, the base spirit that we're working with when you look at Irish and Scotch whiskeys, and our distilleries that we have over there, and then you take the base spirit that we're working with for bourbon, they're quite different, right? The bourbon tends to come out quite richer. And then you have your maturation process what happens. With bourbon, you're using one-time use barrels. That's it. Mm-hmm. Nothing has been in that barrel beforehand, and nothing will go into it afterwards as far as bourbon goes.
And for me, that's the biggest reason why I don't like too much age in my bourbon. Like eight to 10 is like beautiful. Anything above that is just fast downhill.
One of the funny things, if you talk to master distillers and whiskey makers about like the 23-year-old whiskey or the 30-year-old whiskey that they released that one time, the question isn't about how good that was. The question is about how many barrels did they throw out that weren't good enough to put in a bottle.
Yeah,
I can guarantee you that they're probably throwing out, 8 barrels for every one that is actually still okay.
Which is probably why it's so expensive.
Really quickly. Yeah. That is, because the loss on it is huge. Mm-hmm. You can over oak it, right? Like you take a tea bag and you throw it in a cup of water. You can leave it in there too long. You leave it in there for 30 or 40 minutes. You don't want to drink what's left.
Oh God, no.
Right. And that's kind of what's happening with your barrel, right? There are sweet spots. We like to find that our sweet spot for our bourbons is anywhere from 6 to 12 years. And I know that's a pretty broad range, right?
Yeah.
But, certain distillers will have flavors that they like more than others. Mm-hmm. But we'll generally cut maturation between 12 and 15 years. We have released older products. We will release older products, but they're few and far between because we don't want to get into that world of oak, and nothing else, right?
Yeah,
that's not because it's not enjoyable, right?
No, I mean, and it is to some people, and for a lot of people, it's the collecting and the rarity that this enjoyment. They absolutely have no intention of ever opening it, which is part of the whole thing. But yeah, I mean, for someone who actually likes to open, enjoy, and share whiskeys, yeah.
I mean, I think a great thing with Basil as well is this does everything that you want a bourbon to do, right? It gives you all the traditional qualities that you want, all those vanillas, all those caramels, those kind of confectioner sugar flavors. It gives you a little bit of spice, but it's nowhere near what I would consider to be spicy. But it has a little bit of a tingle to it. It's a tiny little bit of dryness coming through on the back that allows to show the wood come through a bit more, but it's light. It's not very thick on the tongue. You don't get left with this kind of oily residue or anything like that. You don't get too much dryness. It's a really good indication of this is what bourbon is going to show you. And from here, it's going to get more intense. Yeah.
I like to draw parallels between whiskeys and music quite a lot. And the idea for me with Basil Hayden is it's like listening to a full orchestra, but at about 30% volume. Like you're getting all of those interesting notes and you're getting the piccolos, you're getting the oboes, but nothing is too piercing, nothing's too earth rattling. It's whiskey flavored whiskey. It's bourbon flavored bourbon, and it does it incredibly well.
Well, it's funny that you make that comparison. My background is music, right? That's kind of where I came from before I moved to Canada, and I always consider I love a good rock and roll song, right?
Yeah.
It's not the only thing I listen to, but I love a good rock and roll song. And to me, Basil Hayden is the Eagles.
Yeah.
Right? Where you wake up.
It's a peaceful, easy feeling.
It is a peaceful, easy feeling. And then Knob Creek is like the Led Zeppelin.
Yes.
Right? They're both going to give you what you want, but in very, very different ways. But they still kind of fall within the same kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of my favorite way of describing it. So it's funny you brought that comparison up with them.
So I think we'll stick with that comparison. So we'll put a pin in that for a second. But just before we move on to the next whiskey, I do want to mention that Basil Hayden, of course, is available at strathliquor.com. You can buy it online right now. We ship anywhere within the province, so you can pick it up in store. And as with everything we're featuring on these videos that we have in stock, while stocks last and for the next couple of weeks, it is on a 10% discount for all Dram Association members. So you can sign up for free. We've got about 1,200 members right now. So every single one of you is eligible to get 10% off. Regular price on a full-size bottle just like this is $53.83, which means that right now you can get it for $48.45, which is a screaming deal for a whiskey of this quality. Right. But if you're thinking, I'm very excited about this whiskey, but I'm excited to see what else is coming up on the show. Well, don't worry, you can afford more than one whiskey because we also have the half-size bottles. So you can get a 375, normally $32.52. You can pick one up for $29.27, so $30, and you can get yourself a half-size bottle of Basil. And it's a great thing to have on your shelf. My whiskey collection is vast majority of it is Scottish and Canadian, but I almost always have a bottle of Basil hidden tucked away in the back somewhere. And the other whiskey I almost always have is Old Grandad, because for me, if I'm reaching for a bourbon, I either will just want a big glass of bourbon I could drink straight up and not have to worry about doing anything to it. Because, bourbon, it works with ice. Being a little sweeter, it works. You can add a couple of drops of water, but sometimes I just want to sit there with a bottle in one hand and a glass in the other and Netflix on in front of me and not have to worry about what I'm doing. But then Old Grandad is the other one, because this is so incredibly versatile. To me, why I was drawn to this whiskey in the first place is it tastes like someone started to make an old-fashioned and gave up halfway through and bottled it. It's so orangey. It's got cloves. It's got cinnamon. It's bigger. It's bolder. It's the same. You can you can tell that there's the same kind of influence, the same kind of blueprint, same backbone as Basil Hayden's, but just a little bit friskier. So what band would you say Old Grandad's more like? I've got an idea in my mind, but I want to see where you go with that.
What band would I say Old Grandad is like? Okay, so here's the kind of thing that I like with Old Grandad. Old Grandad to me would probably be. See, there's already a band that's very closely associated with it, but I feel personally that for me, Old Grandad's kind of like the Guns N' Roses.
Nice, yeah,
right, because it kind of has
little opulent, a little loud.
Yeah, it's big, it's bold. There's a bit of a roughness to it, but all of those things come together perfectly.
Yeah,
and there's also still kind of a sweetness to it. You know, you can still bang out a Patience or a Sweet Child of Mine or something like that, right? But you know, all the feeling that you're getting off of this, you could be mine, right? It's
oh, nice. I like that. Yeah, that's good.
This is a whiskey that I think is probably one of the most commonly opened whiskeys in my apartment. The sad thing with it is that we don't actually sell it in Ontario.
Oh, in general, or just the bottle and bond version?
Old Grandad, you don't really see it in Ontario.
You don't get Old Grandad at all? Oh my God.
No.
I am so sorry.
So normally when I'm traveling around all the time, I'll go, okay, well, look, you know, I'm getting a little bit low, so, you know, I'll pick it up in, you know, BC or Alberta or wherever I am. But I haven't been on the road for a year. So we're getting close to.
Right, I'll buy one myself and I'll package it up personally and say that it's aftershave or something. We'll send one off to you.
Yeah, olive oil. You don't have to do that. I'm sure I'll be able to find a way of getting that. But it's kind of goes to show that it's one of those whiskeys that, you know, I do constantly go back to because this is that next step up as far as depth goes.
Yeah.
But it has that bit more of a raw kind of feel to it. Now, for the creation of this, we're looking at the exact same mash bill, right? So 63% corn, 27% malted barley, and then, 27% rye, 10% malted barley. Looking at the exact same yeast strain. The exact same distillation method is going to be the same. However, our distillation proofs are going to be different. So we're actually going to pull Basil Hayden off at a little bit of a lower ABV and OGD off at a bit of a higher ABV, right? So naturally what that means is that we're going to have to water down Old Grandad before it goes in the barrel. We're not going to have to do it with Basil Hayden.
I love that you call it OGD, by the way.
OGD,
the first time you mentioned OGD, I misheard you, and it took me back to remembering a not particularly well thought of bottle that I've never seen outside of Scotland of OVD rum, which for some reason is always behind the bar. I'm like, OVD? What's that going to?
Yeah, that's maybe not the most palatable thing in the world.
OGD is much better.
Oh yeah, OGD is. Yeah, and it's crazy because I don't even know myself saying it. But it has that kind of that richness to it, right? Style wise, as far as maturation, Basil is going to go for that small batch style, right? So small batch is going to be much closer towards the center of our maturation warehouses, where we're getting less fluctuation in temperatures, right? So we're going to get more of a generally consistent rate of maturation, right? When we're along the outside walls and along the bottom and along the top, we're going to start seeing variances, right? We can have a 20 degrees Celsius temperature swing between our first floor and our 8th floor or 7th floor, right? So you can see there that you're going to have very, very different whiskeys, even if they go in on the exact same day and come out in the same day, but one's on the bottom, one's on the top. So when we're pulling Old Grandad barrels, they'll come from around those edges, kind of the same way we will do Jim Beam White, Jim Beam Black, Old Overhold, stuff like that. So we've got a wider range of whiskeys to work with, but also more drastically different whiskeys to work with, right? So we can kind of, the formula allows us to play a bit more to keep consistency going. You get a lot of really cool orange oil notes. That's that old-fashioned kind of note that you're getting. I always get a little note of like a chocolatey kind of thing in there. It always reminds me of like, I never liked to taste them, but I loved the smell of Terry's chocolate orange. And it kind of reminds me of that. And also it does follow the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897. So the Bottle and Bond Act, we see that coming up a lot. We're starting to see it a hell of a lot more now within the bourbon world. Bonded was essentially, believe it or not, this was actually the first real quality control law based on consumable products in the States.
Oh, wow.
So before they had laws on quality for food, they had laws on quality for bourbon.
Well, I guess with distillates, it's when it goes wrong, it can go really wrong. So that kind of makes
it can. Well, yeah, I mean, it really can.
Yeah.
But basically, what the Bottled and Bond law says, to kind of break it down to its simplest form, is that it's the product of one distiller from one distillery in one distillation season. Generally, our distillation seasons will run from January to June, July to December. Right. So think the start of the single malt rule. Right, you got that one distillery working away, but now you can only make it in one season, essentially.
Nice.
And then it's going to have to go into barrels in a federally bonded warehouse. So you don't have constant access to it. It's it's guarded by the federal government, essentially.
And they dictate the ABV that it goes into the barrel in as well, don't they? Yeah.
So they dictate the ABV you bottle it at. So 50% ABV, and then it has to be a minimum of 4 years in that barrel.
Cool.
Right. So it was just a quality of standard thing, right? Like, you have to make sure that all items that carried a bonded seal, you knew exactly what they had to be there. And that kind of meant that anybody who wasn't making bonded whiskeys or wasn't working with bonded warehouses, government was essentially trying to target them as being less quality to encourage more people to bond their warehouses, because then the government knew exactly how many barrels of whiskey were actually being matured and how much they could actually tax on, right?
Yeah, that's very clever. So bonded actually predates straight, is that right?
I don't think the word bonded predates straight. No, they usually go together. So straight is more just the kind of the minimum requirement that you've got for.
So I mean, historically wise,
straight would have been around first.
Okay, cool. But it wasn't a government thing. It was just an industry thing.
Yeah, well, I think there was regulations on it. I don't think the full regulations came into pass until. I mean, bourbon really has only been officially regulated as an entire entity since 1964.
And it's amazing how many people get confused when I mention bourbons that are from outside Kentucky as well. It's like, I thought it had to be from Kentucky. Like, no.
And look, there's a lot of reasons that people can be kind of misled with things within the bourbon industry. The reality of it is about 95% of bourbon production does occur within Kentucky.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be kind of natural that people will kind of get the assumption that it should be made there. It's only now that we're kind of starting to see more of I don't know if you call it like an artisanal renaissance, so to speak, within the bourbon world, where we are starting to see a lot of bigger distilleries and bigger name distilleries pop up in the Pacific Northwest. You got the guys down in Waco, Texas, that are making incredible bourbon. The Hudson Valley, we're starting to see it in the Rockies, and now we're seeing an expansion of it. But for the longest time, I mean, Kentucky was really and still is the spiritual home of it, but was really the central of production of the industry.
Yeah, nice, beautiful. So I'm intrigued though. What is the band that has strong ties with old Grandad? Because I'm sure it's not the band I was thinking of.
The band that has strong ties with them? No, yeah. I was talking about Guns N' Roses.
Oh, Guns N' Roses has ties with something. Oh, my apologies. I have no idea what Guns N' Roses are usually tied together with. The band I was thinking for old Grandad for me was Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because it's big, it's playful. There's a whole lot of variety. They can go in any direction genre-wise. But at the end of the day, you can always tell whatever the lineup is, because Red Hot Chili Peppers is always changing. There's always like classically trained musicians underneath all of that. Like you can tell that Flea knows what the hell he's doing. You can tell that John Frusciante is an incredible guitarist. But they don't take themselves too seriously. Yeah. No,
and that's kind of it. I do kind of, now that I'm sitting looking at it, I kind of want to change my answer a little bit. Because I kind of think of the band now.
Oh yeah. Oh, the actual band. Nice.
The band, yeah.
The Last Waltz guys.
Yeah, there's something about it. Like it still has that kind of rough edge, but there is the band did a big sound. It was full, but there was a genuine undertow with it, right? Like everything was real, purposeful, and genuine and real. I think a lot of that carries through with all. So yeah, I'm changing my answer.
The band. I like it.
The Eagles, the band.
Nice.
I think we're starting to see what kind of mood I'm in today.
All right. So Old Grandad Bald Bond is available at the Strath right now. Regular price $39.91. Now $35.92, which is upsettingly low, to be honest. Like, I don't want to say that to someone that works for Beam, because don't tell your bosses that you need to increase the price, please. But it's that's fantastic value.
It is, and I mean, if I have my way, we won't be seeing any crazy. Not that I do ever get my way, but I think you're never going to see this jump $20 a bottle. I'll tell you that much.
Nice. So we've got Basil. We've got, I guess, in a sense, the whiskey that predates and is kind of historically the ancestor to Basil. And we're going to go to something quite new next. Something we're exploring all kinds of new horizons here with the whiskey I'm always afraid to say because I'm never quite sure if it's Legend or Legend. Legion. All right. Like a Legion, yeah. The Legion of Doom. Got you.
Yeah. Well, I like to kind of think of it as, when you tell the story of Legion, you're really talking about allegiance. So that kind of, that's take allegiance, Legend.
Nice.
But yes, it does.
It doesn't help that the first words on the back of the bottle are two legendary creatures.
Yeah. I mean, this is a really, really cool, neat product, and something that I think a lot of people, because with most whiskeys, right, or with a lot of whiskeys, this was kind of teased before the whiskey came out, right? Like people knew what we were working on, or knew there was an idea coming through. They knew the broad idea of what it was going to be, but nobody had tasted it yet, right? And I think a lot of people, as happens with most things, they heard one or two bits and let their brain fill the rest of it in, and were very, very against the whole idea of what they thought Legion was going to be. I think once we got a chance to release it and actually get people taste it and tell the real story of what Legion actually is, I think there was a bit of a shift in it. People have really kind of started to see Legion for what it is, which is really the future of bourbon and what we have to look towards the future of bourbon, right? When we see the rules and regulations around bourbon production and what we have to do in order to call ourselves a bourbon, it ties your hands when it comes to innovation. Yep. Right? Because, if you have all these distilleries that have to follow all of these rules before they can do anything else, right? Like, naturally they're all going to come out. And that's why there is very common flavors throughout the whole bourbon category. Then we have to look at innovation and bring out new things and keep our consumers guessing and keep, the people who are genuine fans, give them something new to drink, right?
Yeah.
With Legion, this is really us as Beam Suntory using the advantages that we're lucky to have, right? Give you kind of, for your listeners, a very, very quick backstory, right? Beam Suntory as a company has only been around since about 2014. That was obviously Suntory coming over and purchasing Beam brands, right? Now with that, a couple of things happen. Third largest liquor company in the world. Cool, great. Bringing together these two huge storied houses of whiskey. Again, really fantastic. But along with it, we became the first and only liquor company to own and operate distilleries in the 5 major whiskey making regions worldwide. Right? So you've got
this is the creation of the Owl blend as well, right? Which came out about the same time. Yeah,
exactly. Right. So you've got distilleries in Ireland, not just as the Kilbeggan Whiskey Distillery. I grew up just down the street from the Kilbeggan Whiskey Distillery.
Oh, really? We're going to be getting into that a little later on with the next 2 whiskeys. Actually, I'm going to question you on that.
Okay, but that really is the in my mind the home of Irish whiskey, right? I'm sure a lot of people would argue with that one, but bring it on. Then, in Scotland, you've got such great storied brands, right? Bowmore, Lefroy, Auchentoshan, Glengarry, the partnership with Beam Suntory and Edgerton Group, where you have Macallan, Highland Park, and Glenrothes, famous grouse. I mean, that's, we can't forget how much of a behemoth that brand of whiskey is.
I've got to say, though, I've always preferred Teachers.
Teachers, is it? See? I always forget Teachers, and I feel really bad about it. It's a great whiskey. And then over in Japan, Yamazaki, Hakushu and Cheetah. Then you have, the Hibiki brands and Toki to come out of those. Here in Canada, Canadian Club, Alberta Distillers, 2 fantastic, very storied distilleries as well. And then obviously in the States, the James Beam Distilling Company and Maker's Mark. So it's really cool having all of that underneath one umbrella. But even cooler is the fact that we have the people who make it all under one umbrella.
Yeah.
And, it's Scotch whiskey makers. That's what they do. They make Scotch whiskey. Bourbon whiskey makers make bourbon. it'd be a very rare occasion where in their mind at any time they would have said, "No, I wonder if I was to make a Scotch whiskey, how would I do it?"
Mm.
Something like Legion is really doing that, right? I mean, for this, we essentially took one of the best blenders of whiskey in the world, Shinji Fukuyo, over from the House of Suntory, and said, if you were to finish a bourbon and make a bourbon, how would you do it?
Nice.
Right? And then we had, Fred, who is widely considered one of the best, if not the best distiller of bourbon worldwide, creating the base for him so he knew he was working with something of high quality to start with. And then Shinji being able to come in and create the blend. Using some external and secondary barreling, so there's red wine and sherry barrels in there, blending them all back in them with the original bourbon that he's vatted on the side. You're getting, if you pour yourself a little sip of it there, if you haven't already.
Oh, I'll crack her open right now.
Yeah, crack her open. I'm going to grab this bottle here. I don't have a glass for this one. I
like that you've got a little stand for it, though.
Oh, yeah, a little glorifier. It's like a... So the great thing with this is that when you get that first nose, it smells like a beam bourbon.
I'd never noticed the words on the inside of the lid there.
Two
That's
Legends,
awesome.
One Bourbon.
Yeah, that's great.
There's, this bottle is actually like, talk about Easter eggs on a bottle. There's a lot of them on here. But nose-wise, this smells like a beam bourbon. It's only after you let it sit for, couple of seconds, maybe 30 seconds or so, that you're really going to start to see the fruitiness coming through on it, right? And that's where we're going to start to see the sherry barrels and red wine barrels start to impart some of the flavors, right? But the great thing is that it profiles first and foremost as a bean bourbon. On the palate, it does the exact same thing. The first flavors you get taste like a bean bourbon. Actually, the first flavors you get through are almost like you just had a sip of Jimmy Black. And then it starts to evolve itself. And on the swallow, the first flavor you get back up your gullet is Jimmy Black. And then it starts to evolve itself. And it comes through some really, really, really cool steps, especially on, like, the finish is really where we start to see the artistry involved in what it is Shinji does, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have that Kentucky tradition in the bourbon, but Japanese blending it's an art. It's a true art form. And how they show a lot of their skill, a lot of that artistry through is on the finish. It's that journey it can take you on. I mean, you can literally clock the finish on this whiskey at over a minute of still evolving flavors. I mean, that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But now they have a chance to do it with something that's a little bit richer of a base than a straight barley base, say, for example, or a straight corn base.
And it's a big thing in Japanese culture in general, that idea of a journey, that idea of transformation. And that's kind of what they aim for in their whiskey profile. You do really, really get that. And it's a hell of a journey.
It really is. And, it brings you, like, I kind of mapped it out one day, and it was really, really interesting. I'm not saying that this is exactly how it happens, because everybody tastes things that are a little different, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I was sitting down here. This was when Legion first came out back in 2019, I think it was.
Yeah.
And before we launched it, I had a little sample bottle here. And I was trying to, get to know it, right? Because I'm going to spend, the next however many years telling the story of it. You got to know it inside out, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to taste, and I was like, I'm just going to map out the flavors. I'm just going to write them down on a piece of paper, what I'm getting and when it's evolving.
Yeah.
And it was crazy because when you write out things like oak, vanilla, then you start talking about some fruitier characteristics. Then you start talking about some of those deeper kind of stewy fruits. I start to get through some kind of, almost floral notes, then borderline molassesy kind of qualities, but also with floral notes in it, and then gradually tapering back off to being back at vanilla and caramel and oak.
Mm-hmm.
When you actually write them all out on a piece of paper and you think about Beam Suntory as a company, you see the travel, right? It goes from the traditional bourbon finishes to the traditional Irish whiskey finishes, to the traditional Scotch whiskey finishes, to the traditional Japanese whiskey finishes, and ends up coming back through Canada into, with that oak and caramel and vanilla. It's literally like it takes you on a journey around the world through all the different types of whiskey that we make. I mean, just to be able to create flavors and blends that will bring those flavors out. Obviously, you don't have to go searching for them too much, right? Like they kind of make themselves pretty known to you. And to carry that out over the course of 30, 40 seconds truly, truly shows the genius really in what it is that Fred and Shinji do.
Yeah, that's amazing. The the big change for me that I've been trying to track is it's one of those things where you can't pinpoint exactly where it happens. It's like a perfect blur from one color to another. It goes from an orange all the way over to a peach and then to a pear, and I have no idea how.
And you don't know when one stops from the other.
Yeah.
All you know is
mad.
that it was there.
It was there.
You really recognize it. It's already going. Yeah.
That's
cool.
amazing.
There's just so much evolution in the palette on it, and it's something that like this, with using those secondary barrels. We're not the first people in the bourbon industry to do it. Never will claim to. This isn't actually even the first one that we've made that takes advantage of this. But using it a bit more thoughtfully than just what we need to do something new, toss it in a port barrel.
Yeah,
right? Using it a little bit more thought than just doing that, and kind of again working with a purpose and with a goal, right?
And it's a really interesting combination of the styles, and it's something relatively similar in concept, I think, to a whiskey that you presented to us a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, probably now. God, I've been here a while. Remember that time you came and did a tasting for us on the rooftop, and we had to close a little early because of the forest fires, and no one could breathe because of the smoke.
I do remember that. Yeah,
that was mad, wasn't it?
That was very smoky.
Yeah, I can't remember. We had like burgers or something with it. It was kind of fun.
That was a fun day, actually.
Yeah. But one of the whiskeys that you presented that day was bittersweet for us because it wasn't actually available at the Strath at the time. It was at the time it was a government exclusive, which thankfully didn't last too long. Where we have access to it now. We had it. I think we've just sold out. We'll get it back again as soon as we can. Was the Basil Hayden Dark Batch? I think it was called Dark Rye. Which was very much. It felt like using techniques and ideas that are much more familiar to Canadian whiskey making, and then using it. Yeah, and I think they actually used Canadian whiskey in that one, didn't they?
We did, yeah. So with the rules and regulations, whether you look at bourbon and rye, like one of the main, most important rules with bourbon is what we call a genuine product.
Yeah.
So we're not allowed to put in no additives whatsoever. So literally, if you pick up a bottle of bourbon, it's water, yeast, grain, wood, and thyme. That's all that's in there. With rye whiskey, it follows pretty much all the same rules, with the exception of we do have a 2.5% potable liquids rule. So kind of like with the 909 rule here in Canada, we can use those, certain liquid aged materials that we can put in there. So we kind of took that approach with the Basil Dark Rye, adding in that port style wine in with a blend of Canadian rye whiskey and American rye whiskey, because those two are both going to be different as well, right? And really taking the approach of blending that way, certainly much easier for us to innovate on those sort of levels within the rye category, which is why we saw some really cool ones working out. We actually used the same rye blend, the Canadian to American, and then just switched out the port for blackstrap rum for our Caribbean Reserve rye.
Yes, I've seen that around. I haven't tried it yet.
I do not like rum. I've been on record a billion times saying I do not like rum.
Yeah.
But this, I hate that I don't like rum because I love tiki cocktails. I love them, right? But for some reason, it just doesn't sit with me. But this just gave that a perfect opportunity to make all those cocktails I felt I'd been missing out on my whole life.
Nice.
Now I could just put a bit of that in and it just does everything you want to do.
And maybe it'll be your gateway,
I don't know.
Yeah, there's a small chance. I mean, I didn't think I liked tequila until I tried that Barefaced tequila, the Oaxaca Barefaced or whatever it was called.
They did a really good job on that.
I know I really like tequila. So
yeah, they did really, really good. Tequila is like my other, like whiskey and tequila. That's pretty much the only liquor that I'll drink.
Nice.
Cognac. I do like a good brandy or cognac.
Beauty.
I guess there's nothing clear, really.
I mean, that's fair. No gin?
No. No, I have a really, really, really sensitive palate to bitter.
Were you at the festival in 2020? I can't remember. Yeah. Did you get a chance to try the Victoria Whisky Festival Old Perth that we put out?
I didn't. Actually, that one, because I don't know if you remember, was it the first year they brought in the rule where you couldn't actually go from room to room?
Yes. Yeah, that is.
So I got just stuck in my room.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Which,
yeah,
I mean,
it was a busy festival as well. I feel like it felt bigger than anyone. Yeah. But yeah, that one I will definitely make sure that you get a sample at some point, because I would like to see the perspective of someone who definitely knows their whiskey and knows what they're doing and knows what they're talking about, who doesn't like gin, because this smells like a gin. It's the weirdest thing. And it's actually a perfect segue because we're doing this series in collaboration with the Victoria Whisky Festival. We do have some of these bottles left. They're available still for 10% off and will be throughout the duration of this series. But yeah, it smells like a gin, and that's really unique and quite interesting. But yeah, it's bizarre. I'd love to get some to you. And we will get some to you potentially at some point. But in the meantime,
well, you know what? Just put a little share dram aside for me, and then we can drink it together next one in Victoria.
That sounds beautiful.
I'd rather share it with you than
I look forward to it.
Sit at this desk and drink it.
Next time you come into the festival, book yourself an extra day on either side, because my house is like 5-minute walk away from the venue. So come, we've always got room on the couch for you.
There we are. Touchdown.
And so we are, as I said, in collaboration with the Victoria Whisky Festival right now. And for those of you who didn't see the last episode, in my hand is a 2021 Victoria Whisky Festival Glencairn glass. Of course, the festival never happened, but the glasses did get made. And the whole idea of this series is to try and bring some of the magic of the festival to you at home, but also allow the participants at the festival who usually would display their wares there to give them a stage. So thank you very much, Ray, for joining in on that. But also to raise money for local charities. So we are selling these 2021 Victoria Whisky Festival glasses. They are $10 each. If there's still available, if there's any still available right now, please go to stratliquor.com and pick some up. There will be more available if it's sold out. We're actually we're not putting them all up for sale. We're separating them into 3 or 4 months batches, so that each charity has a chunk set aside, because we're actually going to have a different charity every month for the next 3 or 4 months. This month, we're donating all proceeds to the Victoria Child Abuse Prevention and Counselling Centre, which is formerly known as the Mary Manning Centre. That's something, the Whisky Festival, for those who aren't aware, is a 100% charitable organisation. It's not a business, there's no profit, it's all volunteers. It's an amazing thing. And we're trying to step up to the plate and help the Victoria Whisky Festival with some of those lost funds from that they're missing out on this year. And with that in mind, I will be buying one of these glasses. Probably not one that I've already drunk from. Probably I've got a clean one right here. Actually, I'm going to spend $10. I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to mail this off to you, Ray. Give me your address at the end of this, so you can feel like you took part in the Victoria Whisky Festival 2021.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much.
It's not quite the same, but we're close.
But how about you let me buy it and you just send it out?
Well, we'll sort it out either way. Maybe I'll end up giving you 2. But yeah, the festival that never happened. These are collector's items now. Also, I just want to give a shout out to some of the local whiskey clubs that we're working with to be able to raise some money as well. Anytime that any of the distilleries and distributors are donating any product, we will be passing that on. Via giving the bottles that are left over to a local whiskey club and letting them do with what they want, and then they will send us a check for the charity. That is how we're working that out, because we're legally not allowed to distribute whiskey, of course, because we are a store, and that would be not right. But as soon as it's in private hands, they can do whatever the hell they want with it. Anything that has been donated by any of the participants, and there's no, I just want to mention, there's no pressure for any of the companies who are working with us on this series of tastings. We understand that not everyone is Beam Suntory. You don't all have deep pockets. Not everyone is able to donate right now, especially some of the smaller companies. And we don't want to, forget about those guys. We're going to give those guys a platform as well. But yeah, thank you very much to Beam Suntory for donating all the products today. There will be a check written for the Victoria Child Abuse Prevention and Counselling Centre in your honour.
That's awesome. It's an absolute pleasure.
And the hang on, I've already forgotten which one it is. It's not Legend, so it's
Legion.
Legend. It's not Legend, it's Legend. The Legend is available right now. Regular price $55.56. Now exactly $50 with your Dram Association discount. I do want to mention, of course, if you are seeing this video, a few weeks after it's aired, don't fear. You can still get that 10% discount. All you need to do is sign up for the premium membership of the Dram Association, where you can get 10% off any whiskey all the time. All right. Now, before we get on to the last 3 whiskeys, I'm going to take a little bit of a break to talk about you, Ray.
Okay.
I know, right? Well, one of the
I should probably have a whiskey before this.
So one of the big things about whiskey and the whiskey industry in general is it is a personal thing. It is everyone has their own story, their own whiskey story. If you want to give us just a little bit of an insight as to how you got into whiskey, that'd be fantastic. We've already heard a little bit of your past with Kilbeggan there over in Ireland, and I do have one fantastically embarrassing story, which I'm hoping that will ruffle some feathers with higher ups with other companies. I know Beam Suntory won't give a crap, but I'm going to be asking you. Outside of any whiskey owned by your parent company, which actually for you actually eliminates quite a lot of them.
Yeah.
What is your favorite whiskey distillery or maker if it's a blend or something?
Okay. I'll try and answer that one first. So this is really tough because I've been with Beam Suntory for 3 years now, right? But obviously have been a big whiskey fan for a long time before that. I got real lucky in that the majority of the brands that I used to like, this stuff didn't happen overnight, right? Like the majority of the brands that I would purchase throughout my entire life all end up actually being Beam Suntory brands. So, you know, I got super, super lucky with it.
So I guess the question really is which brand do you want Beam Suntory to buy next?
Oh, you know what? There's actually.
What would you love to have in your portfolio?
There's a really cool little distillery that just opened up in Dublin. Opened up a little while ago. They took over an old church. It's called the Pierce Lyons Distillery. It's right in the heart of the city.
Nice.
So, you know, for me, I think it's great to see, you know, obviously Sean and the boys over at Teeling kind of really brought back distilling to the city centre of Dublin. But it's really, really cool to see kind of that expanding. Pierce Lyons, for me, I remember driving by that church when I was a kid. And between when it was a church and a distillery, it was like a lighting store. I always remember thinking how crazy it was. There was a lighting store in a church. And then my dad talking to me, I was getting ready to go home a few years back. And he was like, oh yeah, there's a distillery in there now. So the morning after my birthday, hungover as all hell, I trudged into the distillery and they were just the sweetest people. They took the time out of their day to be like, yeah, come, we'll show you around. Garo, the distiller there, kind of, brought through a tasting of stuff that, like, I'm pretty sure that they don't just normally do for their tours. And yeah, they make really, really good whiskey. So, I think that's one that's really, really cool. But I mean, I'll be honest with you, I haven't come across many whiskeys in my life that I haven't liked.
Isn't that true? Yeah. Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about whiskey.
Yeah, but I think the main thing that you kind of got to think about is why. Like, what were they aiming for? You might not necessarily like it, but if they have hit what they're aiming for, then that's a good whiskey.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Someone's going to like it. I think the main one, I guess, if we could purchase completely 110% out, it would be Highland Park. That is it's the only brand I really collect. And,
I see a couple behind you.
Yeah, well, they're like 5 deep.
Yeah. Although I remember last time you were here, you mentioned you have a soft spot for Glenfarclas as well.
I do have a soft spot for Glenfarclas. Yeah, I think they make really, really good whiskies. Well,
that's another one when you do come over finally, and we have a couple of drams. I don't know if you realize we actually bottled a cask strength 12-year-old Glenfarclas Strath edition, a special edition. Wow. So I'll make sure we've got some of that left for you too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think I danced around that one well enough to not be able to get in trouble by anybody.
I think you did very, very well. And you actually killed 2 birds with one stone as well, because you managed to tie in a little bit of your own whiskey history and why you like whiskey with a distillery. So that's perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I think, as far as my background in whiskey goes, like it's, I started working in bars from a very, very young age. I think I was 14 when I got my first bar job.
Same, actually. Nice.
Yeah, but the deal, right? Like small, tiny little town, and we didn't even have a police station. There's nobody gonna. We had a police station that was open till 10 a.m. Or 10 to 1 p.m. Yeah. I
was a glass collector and dishwasher at the tiny bar at the church hall next door to where I lived.
Right.
Yeah, exactly the same.
But I think the big thing, especially in Ireland and Scotland, would be kind of very the same as that. Like, whiskey is kind of like the national drink, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, Ireland's real gift to the world was whiskey, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a big part of kind of that bar culture, and it was just something I became very aware of. And I got a job working at a hotel not too far away from where I'm from. That was a very high end hotel, like 5-star hotels. My first real, I was coming from like a really not 5-star bar to a really 5-star bar, and there was a lot of education involved in that. Whiskey was just something that I kind of fell in love with the stories. Obviously, the proximity to Kilbeggan, and then moving the other way, even like the old Jameson distillery in Dublin City wasn't too far. The new Jameson distillery is quite far away. But yeah, it was something that kind of really, it just stuck with me. I love stories. I think it's kind of why I love music, and why I kind of love what I do now, is because I get to tell stories. But I love reading them and retelling them, and kind of and hopefully crafting some of my own as well. So I think that's one of the things. There's so much of whiskey that there's so much history involved in it, and there's so much family history involved in a lot of it as well, that I think that kind of really just stuck with me. And yeah, I just kind of worked my ass off as much as I could and hoped that eventually somebody would notice. And 30 something years later, they did.
Nice. Yeah. And it's a funny thing. Like I mentioned jokingly, which distillery would you like Beams and Torrey to buy next? That's the interesting thing, because I think for a lot of distilleries that want to remain independent and small and whatnot, if they were to sell themselves to a major company, like Beams and Torrey's got to be high up the list, because they give so much creative control to their individual brands. They're basically just there to allow people's passions to happen. It feels like, yeah.
That's a cool thing with when Suntory purchased Beam. There wasn't a fear there. It was just like this now allows more access to more places with our whiskeys.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are companies out there who maybe don't take that approach and who do want to, we're the bosses now. We say what we say goes.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, with Beam, that's not an approach that we see being taken. It's
yeah. It feels like there's no restrictions and just more opportunity.
No, but I mean also look at how long some of these brands have been around, right? They know what they're doing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. So actually, I mentioned before we started recording, there's some breaking news that would be tying into Beams and Torrey a little bit. Yeah. And we mentioned before with the Owl whiskey, the world malt, world whiskey. And I think Suntory really jumped ahead of the game right there, releasing something like that, because I think it was just yesterday. I was reading this morning and downloaded the official paperwork PDF, the English translation. Japan has actually started regulating whiskeys. You can't call it a Japanese whiskey. Yeah. As of April 1st. As of April 1st, any whiskey that says Japanese whiskey on it has to be made in Japan, 100%.
Hey, good for them.
Right? Yeah.
That's
which is
awesome.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting seeing what a lot of brands that already have product out are going to call their whiskey now. I'm probably world malt, right?
Well, so that means they're going to have to put in regulatory definitions on production as well.
Yep,
which is crazy. When you think about it, it's been 98 years since the Yamazaki.
Yeah, since Masataka was there. Yeah.
1923. So that's crazy that, but that's really good. Actually, I'm really, really happy for that category in that industry. That's going to help them a lot with, those next steps towards building too.
And they've taken it a step further as well than anyone thought they would. I mean, not only have they done that, they've, had a minimum aging period and all this, and said that it can't be whiskey unless there's at least some malted grain of some kind in there as well. But they've also said, not only can you not call it Japanese whiskey, but you also can't use any Japanese imagery at all unless it's made in Japan. You can't use a name of a Japanese city. You can't use a picture of a geisha. You can't you pretty much can't do anything, which is going to be interesting because I don't know. I think you'll probably get away with Legent. I mean, the brushstroke is pretty. I think you'll be all right. Yeah. But yeah, it's a really interesting move that's feels sudden and great. I think it's going to be an interesting shakeup for the industry there. Cool. But more than anyone else, it feels like the Suntory component of it is ready to go for that because
that's awesome. This is why I should read corporate emails.
Well, I don't know if corporate sent it out yet. I think I saw it on Twitter. But yeah,
usually where things break.
Right. But yeah, amazing, interesting news. So I said before we tie back into the last two whiskies, I'll be talking a little bit about Kilbeggan. And that's because I don't know how new it is, but it's new to the Strath. We got it in a couple of weeks ago. It became available to us. Kilbeggan has a rye now, right?
They did make a rye, yeah.
Yeah.
They released that a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's finally made its way to BC.
Really good.
So it's an interesting question because I'd always assumed that rye was very much a North American whiskey phenomenon. The story that I've never really fact-checked, to be honest, but the story I've always been told by Canadian brand ambassadors for Canadian whiskies is that rye came across with farmers from Germany. And that's kind of, yeah, exactly. And that's kind of how it got here. Is rye a traditional grain in Ireland? I don't.
I wouldn't consider it traditional. No. Our traditional grains would be barley and corn. I mean, just because it wouldn't be traditional within the industry, I mean, it doesn't mean we don't grow it, right? Like, you know, you're going to get pretty. When you look at Ireland, there's a lot of space to grow things, right? You know, you see all that space, and there's only 4 million people or so who live around the outsides. So except for me, right in the middle. But yeah, there's a lot of fields. So yeah, I mean, I can't remember rye being grown when we were kids. Certainly never remembered it within the whiskey. I mean, I couldn't remember. I could be totally wrong with this, but I can't remember an Irish distillery making a rye whiskey before Kilbeggan. Again, I could be wrong. It could have kind of slipped in there, but you know, I think you're going to see a really big shift within the Irish whiskey industry. Kilbeggan, you know, I think they're on a very definite path as to what they're doing. We're seeing some really, really cool stuff come out, like, you know, the rye, the single pot stills.
Yeah, on the single pot still with it's got oats in it, doesn't it? Which is really cool. I'm
not sure they put oats into it, but again, the experiment with traditional or non-traditional grains. Mark down at Waterford Distillers, you know, he was over at Bruichladdich for a long time. You know, they kind of have a very, very interesting outlook on what they do. He's kind of brought that over to the Irish whiskey industry, and you know, Irish distillers themselves are already starting to break out. There's so many more independent distillers popping up. You're going to see a lot more non-traditional use or grain usage when it comes to Irish whiskey, and it's cool, right? Because Irish whiskey, I mean, you know, went from being the real behemoth worldwide of whiskey to distilleries.
Yeah.
You know, the industry really fell apart. So it's
around the year 2000 was like the real low point, was practically nothing left. But since then, it's just rocketed. And it feels like since then, they've really opened up to ideas that don't necessarily start in Ireland. They've really opened up to taking some interesting concepts from Scotland, from North America,
Look, there was, you know, better part of 80, 90 years there where the Irish whiskey industry was, you know, really on its back. A lot happened in those 80 or 90 years. Yeah. And, you know, you can't just work through them all to try and catch up. Sometimes you have to jump ahead with everybody else and adapt, right? And, you know, I'm really looking forward. I think the Irish whiskey industry is going to be very exciting over the next 10 or 15 years.
Absolutely. And they're working in collaboration with people in the industry from elsewhere as well. Like one of the most exciting Irish whiskies I had in 2020 was the trilogy of whiskies that was brought out that was blended by Billy Walker, who's, you know, a huge name in Scotch whiskey. He's
I had those.
Do I have any left? I'm not sure I do. They were very good. They were called the Athru series, and they're planning on releasing 9.
I didn't have it. No.
They're so cool. They plan on releasing 9. They did 3, first set of 3, and then they're going to do 3 more, I think, this year, and then 3 more in a year or two's time. Cool. But yeah, they were all. It was playing with Irish whiskey, but using techniques that Billy Walker used, and when he was working with Ben Riach and Glen Glasso, and now with Glen Allachie. And yeah, it's really interesting. It's nice to see Irish whiskey really experimenting and doing cool things with what they've got. Yeah. And a lot of it is sourced whiskey right now. And as well with Kilbeggan, that's the really exciting thing in the last year or so with Kilbeggan, is that with the release of their new single pot still, it's actually 100% stuff that's distilled at Kilbeggan for the first time in God knows how many years. Yeah. And that's really cool too.
Yeah, like the main distillery that we will have, say, I don't know why I said distillery like that, but I should say name like that. It is a distillery. But I mean, the Cooley distillery is really kind of the home of that Kilbeggan portfolio where you have Kilbeggan brands plus Tyrconnell and Connemara.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they've always had production happening at Kilbeggan. It's just never really had the capacity to do enough, really. So like yearly, once every year or so, they would do like a boutique bottling. So it was distilled on site. I think they only run that still for 9 months of the year. So like that, March to November or something like that. It's the oldest still in the world, right? Like this thing it's not big. Right, and it's been working since 1757. Nice. So you can only push it a certain length, but yeah, incredible whiskeys, and listen, everything good in the world comes out of that area, right?
Of course. Present company excluded. Wait.
Hey, hang on.
So yeah, talking about rye, that's leading us on to where we're going next with this, because we are going now for Basil Hayden's aged 10 years Kentucky straight rye whiskey, which is cool. As you mentioned at the very beginning of this. Oh, nice. You mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, rye whiskey is kind of how that area started out. Sort of rye was one of the first grains to really get distilled out there, right?
Yeah. I mean, in the States, like, yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're breaking it down kind of historically, rye was really the first commercial whiskey that you could purchase in the States, right? And it was those German and Dutch settlers that were coming over. A lot of the Irish and Scotch settlers that came over, sure, a lot of them made whiskey, but the majority of them actually kind of went more towards rum making right after the very start. Quicker, cheaper, make your money faster type thing. But the rye industry, with the boom of bourbon, the rye industry did kind of, almost die, to the point where, things like the Monongahela style rye whiskey, which had a very unique style of distillation, a very unique style of maturation, it kind of became extinct, right? And bourbon kind of took over. Over the last maybe 15 or so years, we started to see American rye trickle back through, American produced rye, because a lot of the American brands of rye were stuff that was being made in Canada and shipped down and bottled.
Yeah, mostly at Alberta distillers, I believe.
Mostly at Alberta distillers. Which I mean is, look, there's nobody in the world can distill 100% rye whiskey the way Alberta distillers can.
Oh God, no.
They are the best in the world.
For column distilled 100% rye, I don't even know if there is anyone that does it.
They're just know what they're doing.
You've got lot 40 that's in a pot still though, so it's it's a completely different beast. Yeah. But yeah, it's a beastie thing.
But we've started to see now, American rye whiskey starting to pop up. And one of the really interesting things about it is that we were only talking about this actually end of last year. Is that we're starting to see geographical differences within the American rye whiskey industry. Like we refer now to our rye that we make, whether it's Jim Beam rye, Knob Creek, Basil Hayden, Old Overholt, we'll refer to it as Kentucky style rye whiskey. Because the rye whiskey that's being made in Indiana or in Indianapolis or in New York or in Texas or in Colorado, they're all very, very, very different to each other. Incredibly different to each other. Which is really interesting. Like this wasn't nothing that was, I don't think anyone planned this, which is kind of cool. It's just naturally happening that in different areas of this country, they're making inherently different styles of rye whiskey. Mm-hmm. So, the fact that it's just naturally kind of taking on this, geographically localized kind of thing, as opposed to a category based thing, is really interesting. So for, our Kentucky style rye whiskey, so obviously we do follow those rules around straight rye. So 51% rye instead of 51% corn. We're still using first time barrels, still distilling to the same kind of parameters.
So there's about twice as much rye in this than there is in the Basil Hayden bourbon, then, at least.
Yeah. So for this one, we use just above the legal minimum for our rye. So just above the 51%. The reason for that is that we want the rye to be very present. We definitely want that grain to shine through, but we want it to be almost to feel like a bourbon-driven rye. Right? We want this to, look, you take a nose, you can get that. right? You get those bourbon characteristics that are traditional, the vanilla and the caramels and all that sort of things.
Honestly, the first thing I noted on the nose was it's got a certain distinctive note that it shares with the old Grandad Bonded. So
what I find they share quite a bit is that borderline tropical fruit characteristics.
Yeah, pineapple.
I think pineapple, I think guava. I always get melon a lot from anything with a high rye content. Melon is something that kind of just really naturally, I don't know why that is. I don't know if there's a scientific reason for that, but anything with a high rye content, I always get different forms of melon.
I'm going to look out for that more because, I mean, like I've said, my my experience with North American whiskies is minimal compared to my Scottish and Irish whiskey experience. But the one thing I always hear about people talking about rye is the baking spice. So that's always the first thing I go to. I'm like, I like baking spice in a whiskey, but tropical fruit, ooh, that sounds...
But, when you kind of think about it, right? Like, I mean, these are a lot of these flavors are things that exist within hops. You get a lot of those kind of very citrusy, very tropical style hops that are also going to give you bitter characteristics. And rye is going to do that as well, right? Like, as a grain, you're going to get situations where obviously you can get tropical notes out of it. I'm getting lots of that on the note or on the palate. It's actually been a couple of weeks since I've tried this. So
nice. I've actually never tried this. I'm about to go in for my first sip ever.
Oh, hey, enjoy, man. This is a truly, truly beautiful whiskey, man. I think this is one of those ones where, we're always very, very happy and very proud of everything that we put out. Yeah. But every now and again, a whiskey comes out where you're like, we just hit that one out of the park. And this is one of those whiskeys.
So the last new Beam product that I tried was I picked up a bottle of the Basil Hayden 10 bourbon relatively recently, which we're sold out of right now. I don't know if there's any more in the warehouse, but if we can get it back, we certainly will.
I think we're working right now to have that being like a yearly release or close to.
Nice.
Both of these. Cool. We're working on it.
And this is the same. This is the same quality that I got from that. It's a fantastic whiskey on the first sip there. Just.
The mouthfeel is great on it. It's a little bit more viscous than we get from the standard Basil Haydens. It would actually be interesting because we do have a Basil Hayden rye that you get available down in the States. We haven't had it here in Canada. But it's really fun doing the Basil original and the Basil 10 bourbon and the Basil rye and the Basil 10 rye side by side. You can really start to see the development of flavors that you're getting off them. But this one is like super, it's that, again, that big thing with Basil Hayden across the board. It's just approachable as far as flavors go. And you don't feel like you've been ripped off,
The amazing thing about this compared to the original Basil Hayden, I just did a quick side-by-side. They're both 80 proof. They're both 40% ABV, but there's so much more flavor packed into this one. Right. It's a TARDIS of flavor.
Yeah. And again, we looking at age state whiskey, right? Like, because we get that a lot with, so you're pulling Basil 10 or Basil regular at like 8 to 9 years, and then you've got one bottle at 10. It's like, the minimum aging of the product is going to be 10 years. Doesn't mean everything in there is 10. Yeah. It just means that we probably had to use a barrel somewhere along the line that was 10 years old. So, we're not actually looking at a 2-year gap. You could be looking at considerably more than that.
Totally. And it's an interesting opposite from what I've been sort of used to recently, comparing older and younger whiskies of the same sort of distillery and vaguely same style. Because I've been having an awful lot, of course, being the ambassador, I guess, locally for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. I have an awful lot of single cask strength whiskies. I mean, not just through the SNWS, but in general, it's one of the things that we kind of do a lot here. So I'm used to the idea that a younger whiskey is actually more flavorful and more feisty. And then when you get older, it actually tones it down and refines it a bit more. But to have this where the younger one is more toned down and refined and the older one actually has much more depth and punchiness to it is an interesting.
So what we get a lot in American whiskey, again, within the bourbon and rye categories in particular, that you see a lot more prevalently than you will see in, say, Irish, Scotch, Canadian, Japanese whiskies. And mostly because of the fact that there is no additives being allowed whatsoever. I'm not saying that everyone in those other categories uses the availability of certain things, but that and the the fact that we must use first-time use barrels is that in age we get pretty defined separation of grain and wood. Right. Yeah. So like with the younger whiskeys, the grain is real prevalent. And once you cross that like 5-year-ish mark, then we start to see the grain disappearing behind the wood and the wood becoming more prevalent until you reach, 12 to 15 years when it's just wood.
Yeah. And it's that golden part of the ratio, right? I mean, in Scotch whiskey, is the main reason you see most single malts released between 12 and 18 are kind of the upper lower bounds for most standard editions. That's where it hits with single malts, and it's much lower for this style of whiskey, and that makes a lot of sense. I certainly I feel like this is a fantastic whiskey. I almost feel like I might personally prefer it slightly a couple of years younger. I want a little bit more of the grain influence on it. Like I'd love to try an 8-year-old version of this.
The regular rye is really tasty as well. So we just haven't been able to get it here in Canada.
Oh, well, we'll start a campaign. It's the funniest thing. I don't know if anything actually, if it's just a correlation, not a causation, but I distinctly remember about 3 years ago, I was on a phone call with Michelle, who you're very familiar with. And also thanks very much, Michelle, for picking up the tab on this one and making it all work. I asked her about, it's great that we got old Grandad here, but could we get the bottled in Bond? Like I had a friend who visited the States and brought me a bottle back. It's absolutely amazing. What can we do? Can we bring it in? About 3 months later, it appeared. Like, I don't know if Michelle worked her magic or not, but it's great that it did.
It's one of those whiskeys that like, it's available kind of here and there. I think there's the only provinces that I kind of guaranteed, like I will get a bottle if I need to get a bottle, are Alberta and Quebec. They're the only province where I'm like, okay, there's definitely going to be old Grandad Bond when I get there. Other provinces, you're like, oh, it could be, couldn't be. Like, if I'm lucky, it might be there. It might be sold out, and they'd be waiting for 6 months or whatever. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but a lot of this is all down to like how much is actually allocated for export, and then out of that export, how much is allocated towards Canada. And unfortunately for us, I mean, that's something that we forget. I find a lot. I know I do, because Canada is so huge as far as geography goes. There's only like 36 million people here.
Yeah. So
as like a market for, I mean, not just whiskey companies, but for, beer and wine and stuff like that. So, there's more people in California.
Yeah. And I think a lot of companies that are, based in the States, just basically think of Canada as an extra state.
I mean, for want of a better, like from a market point of view, I'm sure probably a lot of them do. Not just the American ones. I'm sure a lot of them just look at it and say, well, we're sending it to North America, and there's an extra 30 million people north of it, so include that in. But that's unfortunate, because I think that tends to mean that, we don't get access to a lot of stuff. But one of the good things is that we're seeing the American whiskey industry in Canada, the fandom behind it. It's growing at a rate that I honestly didn't think I would ever see. And with that comes more selections, more options.
Absolutely.
The boards feel more comfortable purchasing stuff in. The companies feel more comfortable sending it. That's not going to sit on a shelf somewhere, right?
Whereas there's always going to be cases of this, we're going to find whiskies that we can't get up here in Canada. At the same time, we're not spoiled for choice anymore. You're always going to be able to go to a liquor store relatively close by and find a decent selection of American whiskies now.
100%.
Any whiskies from all over the world, really.
Yeah, and I don't think we're ever going to go back to that phase we were at 10 years ago, where there was the 5 or 6 that you were going to see, and that was it.
Yeah. And American rye is something that it's one of the biggest mistakes I made when I first took over the whiskey portfolio here at the Strath. When I took over from Pat, is I was like, I was looking at the sales figures, like, well, why do we need American rye? Like, we're in Canada. If people want a rye, they're going to buy a Canadian rye. What's the point? So I think we only had one rye from America for the longest time. And it wasn't until about a year ago when I really discovered there is a huge difference between Canadian and American rye.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah. and not only in flavor profile, but also in like the way it's made. I mean, the whole difference between a mash bill and the individual distillates, and then
a final blend afterwards. Yeah,
exactly. It's a completely different beast. So yeah, I mean, I've been making a concerted effort to make sure we get more American rye in, and this is one of them. This one is available at the Strath right now. You can go to strathliquor.com. It is normally 86.87. It is down to 78.18 for a 10-year-old rye. That is bonkers good. Like we said,
really,
like we said, like if we equate it to a single malt, and you're looking between 12 and 18 is the key points for like that beautiful ratio. This is on the higher end of the beautiful golden ratio, I guess, for this style of whiskey. So if you equate that to an 18-year-old single malt. When was the last time you saw an 18-year-old single malt in Canada for $78? It's
never.
No,
never. I've lived here for 15 years. Never.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And there's a weird thing as well. Like it's something that kind of we've started talking a lot about, and the discussion's happening a lot now within the American whiskey world, about age-stated products and the requirement for the necessity, I guess, of an age statement.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always been super vocal about the fact that I strongly believe an age statement is nothing but numbers on a bottle. Yeah. I really don't believe it in any way denotes quality whatsoever. Because you said, great earlier on, you can have young whiskeys that taste incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And conversely, you can have old whiskeys that taste crap, right? What we're always looking for is, and what I was trying to explain to people is that we're on the search for maturity within a whiskey.
Yes.
And how old it is when it gets that maturity, it's kind of like a person, right? Some people mature young, some people mature old. We're looking for that with our whiskey as well. But one of the great things that we find after doing the testing, and that we can kind of do more testing on this because of where we own distilleries globally, we're actually seeing almost a 2-to-1 maturation rate between Kentucky and Scotland right now.
Yeah.
So that basically hitting that same maturation level in 9 years, that would take 18 years in Scotland. It's kind of crazy, right? So when you kind of think about that, that makes a lot of sense as to why your prices in Scotland are where they are.
Yeah,
It's just a barrel sitting there for literally for twice as long.
In the converse, though, I worked in a distillery for a while. It's in Melbourne, Australia. Right. I worked in the production side of things, and I mean, their whiskey is incredibly expensive. I mean, it's not really their fault. The raw ingredients are expensive. The water's expensive. Getting the wood there is expensive. Like, but we lost about, I think it was 14% a year. Thankfully, in Australia, you can bottle it at 2 years old because we wouldn't have anything left if we waited 5 years.
Yeah, from age of share. Yeah, like we would have high, but nowhere close to that. Yeah, like that's you'd have no choice but to bottle it at 2 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, even at that, like you're cost wise, you'd be bottling at 2 years and charging $80-$90 a bottle.
Yeah. That's exactly what they were doing. And it was a 500 ml bottle too. It's the only way you can do it.
Wow. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a strange world.
The world's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
It certainly is. It certainly is. So we have one last whiskey today, and we're sticking with the rye. We're going a little bit sideways away now from the Basil Hayden brand to a Basil's brother. I don't know. Actually. Yeah. You tell us the story. This one's a Knob
bigger,
Creek.
Tougher brother. This is a Knob Creek. So I actually can't join you in this exact one because I don't have a 2010 bottle out here.
Fair enough. So you got batch one, do you?
I've got the 2009 bottle. Yeah.
Nice.
I know I have a 2010 bottle somewhere, but I could not find it, so it's probably in the storage locker. I did kind of a bit of a clean out just before Christmas because it was getting a little nuts in here.
Fair enough.
And also just before Christmas at summertime. But, when we kind of realized that, okay, this work from home thing is probably going to be a little bit more longer term than was initially expected. Might be time to organize.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the Knob Creek and Basil Hayden are both part of what we call the small batch collection. So this was, taking that whole idea that Booker had for maturing these products. He released Booker's first back in 87, 88, and then followed them up in 92 with Basil Hayden, Knob Creek, and Baker's, and all matured in the same kind of way. 3 of them use the same mash bill, but then we're looking at different maturation times, different distillation proofs, all these sort of things, which are going to work to change our flavors around a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when Booker, retired and then, sadly passed away, and his son Fred, who's our current master distiller, took over, he really innovated a lot within the Knob Creek world. Certainly with the introduction of Knob Creek Rye, which I think is probably still my favorite American rye. I think it just does kind of like I feel about Knob Creek. Everything that you want American rye whiskey to do, Knob Creek Rye does. Everything you want an American bourbon or a bourbon to do, Knob Creek does. It's just one of those brands that it gives you everything that you want and everything that you're expecting. It's
a very no nonsense whiskey.
It is, and it sits in that barrel for a long time, and it just kind of it waits. It really earns its place in the bottle, right? Mm-hmm. Now you guys have the 2010 bottle there, so I believe that was bottled at 63 and a half, something like
63 and a half, exactly. 127 proof. Right. That's a hell of a memory. From Warehouse A.
Warehouse A, yeah. So the majority of these bottles that we're going to see coming out in this yearly release will be Warehouse A. Cool. This is 9-year in the bottle, or in the barrel, sorry. And then, as I said, 63.5%. So that's pretty hefty. This will go into the barrel pretty much bang on that 125 proof. So 62.5%. You can kind of see, because of the issues that we're going to have with humidity and stuff like that within the barrels, we can actually get situations where we see an increase in ABV as opposed to a decrease through evaporation.
And that's to do with humidity, right?
Humidity, yeah.
Yeah.
The first year round, the barrel or batch I have here with 59.8% ABV, so a considerable drop on that one. This to me kind of reminds me in a lot of ways like the Booker's Rye. And anybody who ever brings, it's a different mash bill, but anybody who ever brings up the whole thing about Booker's Rye, and it's absolutely killer whiskey. Like, this is kind of as close as you're going to get to it, right? But we're still sticking to that Kentucky style rye whiskey. So you're still going to have, just above the minimum of 51%. You're going to definitely feel the kind of traditional bourbon flavors driving this one a little bit more. But the heat really profiles well on this. You got a lot of cool. This one is stuck in there.
Yeah, I was just taking the wax off. It was started tearing it off, and it's shooting everywhere.
Oh yeah, the waxes. We have started to fix that. You'll probably notice over the next while that you'll see the Knob Creek bottle changing, the regular Knob Creek.
Oh yeah.
So we've actually returned Knob Creek to a 9-year-old product, 9-year age-stated product.
Oh, cool.
So you can kind of see the new bottling there.
Nice. Are you thinking of doing the same with the Basil?
As of right now, there's no plan. Certainly nothing that we're able to.
Because that's an interesting thing. I should have brought it up when we were talking about age statements before. Is that when that did change from an 8-year-old to a no age statement, by all rights, it theoretically, I think it went up in quality. To be brutally honest,
flavor didn't change.
Yeah, the flavor didn't change. All that really happened is that you're able to keep the price low, which is always nice, but it just became more available. I don't know if that was actually, just me imagining it became more available, but we certainly didn't have any problem bringing it in. All of a sudden we get it in 375s as well. We're like, oh, this is great. Yeah,
like flavor wise, it's like I've done it many, many times side by side, and there's no continuity issues whatsoever with it.
No, I actually did the same thing. I did a side by side with the old age statement and the new age statement. We did it with a little group of friends just to see if anyone could tell the difference. And what we actually did is we did it completely blind. We did 2 of one and 1 of the other, and people had to guess which one was we had 2 of even, and we had no idea. Like no one could. Again, everyone guessed, and it showed in the results.
Yeah, this is the skill of the whiskey makers, right? But when you look at it, I'd love to actually. That might be a little task I'll give myself, because I want to go back through and find exact numbers on it. But I would probably venture to say that Basil Hayden and Jim Beam Black have won more competitions and medals since the removal of the age statement than they did beforehand.
It's just less restrictions on the blending. And as much as, I was going to say earlier, like restrictions in general do tend to breed creativity, especially like as a graphic designer. I want people to give me restrictions. It gives me an idea of where to go, what direction to do. There's always going to be if you're only allowed to paint with 3 colors, you know, you're always going to get a much more vibrant picture if you're allowed to add a 4th in. And
Absolutely.
Those younger casks are essentially just another color.
Yeah. And then bourbon is kind of like being told that you have to paint a dog with 3 colors. We have to use the same colors and the same dog, but it has to look different every time.
Mm-hmm.
So this I find, that melon characteristic I was telling you about, I find it
the
very,
rind, especially
very
melon
prevalent.
rind.
Yeah.
Like cantaloupe.
Very prevalent. Exactly. Very, very prevalent on it. But it blends in very, very nicely with those vanilla characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
But on the palate, I mean, again, my one's kind of considerably lower, 4 points or whatever, lower than the one you're about to drink, but doesn't profile as high as 63.5 or as high as, you know, just shy of 60 that we have here.
There's like, normally if I'm smelling a 63% whiskey, my nose hair is like shriveling. But this is, I can stick my nose right in there and it's my eyes aren't watering at all. It's great.
Yeah. And like you get the physical interaction that you're going to get with a high ABV whiskey, right? Like it's going to do things physically to the inside of your mouth. But you get that beautiful mouth watering, that salivation happening with it. And that kind of protects you a little bit from some of the more volatile flavors. Mm-hmm. So like on the swallow, it definitely is a little bit easier, a little bit softer. I mean, to me, that's sure the first sip, the very first kind of time it hits your tongue and your gums, you feel the presence of the high alcohol. But after that, I mean, super easy whiskey.
That is such a big flavor. Like, I know it's all too easy to draw the parallel because, you know, it says rye on the bottle and it's cask strength, and we've had a lot of news about cask strength ryes over here in Canada recently. Yeah. It's such richer and bolder, actually. Yeah, I mean, I find it's different. Mm-hmm. It's the Alberta Premium cask strength, which I adore, and
did a great job with that. Yeah,
we actually got it in BC, I think, before anyone else, and we were probably one of the first stores in the country to get it, because as soon as it landed in the warehouse, I spotted it and pulled a case. It was back in I think October 2 years ago, and I went straight on the internet to try and find any information, and there literally was no information about it. So I put one of the first reviews up on Reddit, and people are like, well, that's cool, I guess. It's amazing a year and a half later what's happened.
I did a really, really, really great job. I mean, look,
absolutely.
I can't say a bad word about Alberta Premium, and I almost will not let anybody else say a bad word about them. I think they're one of the distilleries worldwide who just does not get the credit for how good they are.
I've always said the same. And one of the prized possessions in my on my shelf right now is a couple of bottles of Alberta Premium from before I moved to Canada that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to get otherwise. That I was gratefully gifted. Was the 30 and the 25-year-olds.
Oh,
they are absolutely stunning. I also have half a bottle of the Dark Horse, which I'm so sad is gone, and I don't know why they discontinued that. But this goes to show just how different. Yeah, this goes to show just how different the American rye style and the Canadian rye style completely are. I mean, of course, Alberta Premium is not a traditional Canadian whiskey in the sense that it's not several distillates then blended afterwards. It's 100% rye. But like this is even different again. There's
again, it's that Kentucky style, right? It has that real bourbon driven rye almost. You get the spice, but really this is a whiskey that's almost built to be the rye whiskey that bourbon drinkers want to drink.
Yeah.
If that kind of makes any sense. And it has a lot of those great qualities to it. And I mean, I think that the fact that this is kind of a yearly release and there are, considerable differences. I mean, when you're looking at a 4% difference on bottling strength, that means you're going to have considerable differences flavor-wise. So it's not just like, okay, this is this year's release, but it's pretty much the exact same whiskey, right? We're actually, you're seeing differences in flavors to it. I think it's really, really cool. I'm bummed. I honestly thought I had to wait to see. We'll finish up here today, and the first thing that I will find is my 2010.
That's all good. I mean, it's good for the experience of being able to showcase the two different editions as well, and talk about the fact that it is going to be hopefully an ongoing series with variation that are sort of tied into it.
Hopefully. I mean, it's always the goal with a lot of these things, right? But the bourbon world is moving so much that it's hard to kind of say with certainty that anything will be around except for the standards, right?
This is true, yeah.
Because we also have to look at the fact that, I mean, with the size of the boom that we're seeing within the bourbon industry, none of this was forecast.
Yeah.
When you take something like, Knob Creek, for example, it's a minimum of 9 years. So you have to be a minimum of 9 years ahead of yourself.
Yeah.
And knowing what's going to happen. And if there's an explosion anywhere in the line, if you get a cold winter and things start to mature a little slower, all of a sudden.
Which is exactly what happened with Japanese whiskey, right?
100%.
Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that Suntory and Beam joined forces in that, is because Suntory was saying, we don't really have the stocks to continue what we're doing, but we want to remain in this category. And it, I think, worked out really well. Thankfully now where Japanese whiskey has recovered in terms of volume produced, maybe if American whiskey isn't able to keep up to demand, maybe we'll start seeing Japanese whiskey take some of that take some of that gap.
Hey, you never know, because I just want to be able to purchase a bottle of Yamazaki 12-year-old for the old price.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I know we've been talking a lot about sort of music comparisons to things, but I can't help but think, with the Alberta Premium Cask Strength fresh in my mind and trying this as well, the Alberta Premium Cask Strength is a fantastic whiskey, but it's fantastic in its sort of cleanness for me. It's sharp, it's clean, it's direct, and it reminds me of like a McLaren or something, right? It does one thing really, really well. Yeah. This is like a Humvee. Like this, you can go off road. You can watch a movie in the back of it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that because it's true. And I mean, as I said, not taking anything away from Alberta Premium. What they do, they're the best in the world at. Mm-hmm. This is just, it's literally showing a grain in a different way, right?
Yeah.
I think it's masterful the way that Fred and his team down there have been able to expand so well on a brand like Knob Creek, so innovatively, and bring through so many flavors that. It still feels like Knob Creek rye, but now you're getting a bigger, bolder, version of it. And also, this allows for so much experimentation for the drinker, right? Because look, the reality of it is, when we're bottling something at 60, 62, or whatever percent ABV, we're not expecting you to drink the bottle at that ABV, right? This is now just allowing you more space to use water, to use whatever additives you like to use to temper it down a bit, to find that proof that you do like drinking it at. Because not everybody loves it at the 49%, or sorry, 62%. But not everybody might love it at the 50%. You might want it at 55. So you can
exactly. Yeah. It's just like where I was saying with the old Grandad. It's versatile.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's great. We got some pretty damn good whiskey here.
Yeah. This has been a fantastic lineup. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So every time that I have some kind of event or something to do with these kind of whiskies, we always end up suggesting something that would be great to see, and it's weirdly just keeps happening afterwards. So like we had the old Grandad Bonded come in, and then we talked about, wouldn't it be great if we saw Beam do something similar to the Dark Horse, and then we got the Dark Rye. So I'm going to put out there in the universe. This is probably the most the most off the wall idea that I'd like to see them happen. But one of my favorite whiskeys from your sister company, Canadian Club, in the last few years has been the Barley Batch, and I would absolutely love to see what something like Knob Creek or Basil Hayden's would do with theoretically, I don't even know if it exists, a straight barley whiskey, where it's the same kind of idea, the same kind of flavor profile they're aiming for, but at least 51% barley in there, and that would be a really unique expression. So if anyone from corporate's watching, that's my idea.
you know what's up.
I don't want credit. I just want to taste it.
Taste it. Yeah. That's pretty much where we usually sit with these things, right? I just want to try it just once.
Just once, please give me a chance.
Just one time.
Beautiful. So I'm sorry that you couldn't make it to Victoria this spring. Hopefully maybe we'll see you in the fall. We'll see what happens. But It has been absolutely wonderful to have you here on a guest on Drinking Out Loud. Ladies and gentlemen, Ray Daniel, a round of applause in your living room for him, please.
And listen, thank you very, very much, Adam, for having me on. And yeah, first possible opportunity, I'll be there right beside you having a drink, dude.
Beautiful.
So,
Lovely.
right, well, I will let you go.
Beautiful. And we will see you lovely viewers on the next video. I believe next up we have Michter's, so we're going to keep this bourbon train rolling. Any kind words for Michter's before we leave?
Keep doing what you're doing. Doing great work.
Beauty. All right. Thank you, Whiskey folk. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, folks. Cheers.